All right. So for transactions, really, I like to think of transactions is like, because I play some video games every once in a while. And you're always feel a lot better when you can save before you go try to fight the boss. Right. Um,
Mhm.
and so basically that's what transactions are. But they're used for a lot of things. And the reason that they're called transactions really, allures back. And if it helps you think about it, think about money, right? And when you perform a transaction, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to give you money and you give me something back. And that completes the whole transaction. Well, you can imagine what it would be like. Let's say, especially in this day and age with technology, right? Let's say you go up to somewhere and you want to buy a candy bar. You swipe your credit card, and let's say that the money got pulled out, but of your account, but the money never made it, the validation, the money never made it to the store. And so they didn't give you that candy bar. They said, sorry, your money didn't come through. The system crashed. See ya. But then you're still out of that $3 for your candy bar. Well, so what a transaction does in terms of the database is we can lump multiple processes together. So, for example, let's just start with keyword number one. So I can say begin transaction. And what we're doing is I'm saying, look, I'm going to start a process, a workflow. And then I'm going to do something in the middle. So let me hurry and run this. So I'm going to say run begin transaction. Uh, let's see. MySQL's a little different. Let's say save point. Um, there we go. So we're going to create a save point, right? So we're going to create a save point called start. And that's basically where I started. And let's say that we're going to do something. Now, this is useful for a lot of things, but let's say that I want to take a look. In fact, because we've already run that, I'm going to say select everything from customer. Actually, let's just take a look at rental. All right, we don't have any prices in there. Let's take a look at customer. All right, so let's say that I'm going to do something. Now, this could be anything. I'm going to go through and I want to change everybody's. Let's say that I want to change Mary Smith. Let's say Mary Smith got married. She's changing her last name. And I'm going to change her last name to Brown. So let's take a look. Actually, let's pick someone else. Let's pick um wow. There's not a male look Joe. So Fowler. We're going to change her last name to Fowler. So Mary Smith is going to become Mary Fowler. So we would write an update statement. And that's kind of like when in the reading, you'll find that a lot of this is for like inserts and updates and deletions. So we're going to update someone's last name. We're going to say update customer set last name equal to Fowler. Now, to do this properly, we would need a where clause. So let's just say like where first name is equal to Mary. Now, this might not be a good idea because what if we have more than one Mary? But let's say we run this, right? And in this case, we only updated one row. So now we could rerun this and we still have Mary Fowler. But oh, look, I forgot to make it all caps to match everything else, right? So we could just fix it, but let's say we want to just undo everything. Because let's say we also delete from customer where last name equals Fowler. Like we're going to delete everything that we just did. But we're just going to demonstrate here just a little bit. Oh, and I broke it. So we're going to skip that part because we have dependent tables. So let's say we want to roll back. Oh no, what did we do? Maybe we just broke it. Anyways, technically, let's just try to roll back. There we go. Okay, so we rolled back, and let's make sure that we're good here. So we should be back to up, and something didn't work right. One of the things you got to make sure when you're doing this is a lot of these have automatic transactions right here, auto commit. So let's change this to, so we can kind of see what's going on here. So I did my save point start, and it looks like I, let's just try rolling back again here. There we go. We're still there. Oh, this is being kind of weird. Okay, let's just set our last name back here before we get crazy. All right, let's start over and see if we can do this again. Let me make sure. Let's change our transaction. That's not what I wanted to. Switch to manual commit. That's what I want. There. Okay, now we should be able to do better. All right, let's try that again. So I'm going to rename this to before, and let's do something else. Say try one. We're going to say save point try one. And then we're going to update this. We're going to change Mary to Fowler again. All right. Now if we select everything from customer, we have Mary Fowler there, but we want to undo that. So we're going to roll back. Let's select everything from customer, and you'll notice that it's back to Smith. So what we want to do is we're basically creating a place that we can go to for safety. And I do this actually with most of my queries. If I'm making any changes, I always do a save point in a transaction, because what we really want to do is verify, especially if you're making changes. It's always good to run, verify, and then correct. So just like in this case, let's do that one more time. I'm going to recreate a save point. We're going to update the name. And then let's go take a look, make sure we got it. Oh, I forgot to capitalize it. So let's roll back. We can go back to customer. She's back to Smith. And then we're going to change this to all uppercase, Fowler. So now let's do a save point again. Take a look. And now that's how we want it. So now it's where we want it. So now we're going to commit our transaction. And now once I've committed, I can't go back. So if I do roll back here, you'll notice that it's still Mary Fowler. So basically, a transaction consists of save point, you do something, and it could be multiple things, and then you commit. Or if something goes wrong, all right, so that's basically a transaction, is a save point, you do something, and then you commit. Just like when you buy that candy bar, you know, basically financially, what a lot of databases do, a lot of systems, is they say, hey, look, I'm going to create a save point, and then I'm going to try to do this transaction, meaning that I'm going to pull the money out. I'm going to pull the money out of your account, and then I'm going to put that money into their account, or attempt to, and then I'm going to wait for validation to make sure that they got confirmation that that money has moved. If all that happens, then I'm going to commit. If something goes wrong, then I roll back. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so we could kind of do something like this. So let's kind of mimic this just a little bit. So I'm going to take a look at rental. Oh, I guess I got to type the rest of the query, huh? So let's take a look at rental. So in rental, we have a customer and inventory. So let's take a look at inventory. And let's take a look at film. So, well, let's just use this one, 367. So we're going to pretend that this customer rents movie 367, which happens to be Blanket Beverly. So if we were going to write a script to handle a transaction for a rental, what we would want to do is we would want to say begin, or sorry, that's SQL Server stuff, save point, start rental. So we're going to create a save point called start rental. And then what we're going to want to do is we want to do an insert. So we're going to say insert into rental. And I'm going to pull that up here again so we can see exactly what's in rental. And we're going to do a rental date, inventory ID, customer ID, return date, staff ID, and last update date. Now I want to take a look at inventory again, because does it have a quantity? It does not have a quantity. Or what is inventory is the, I think it's what's there. Because one cool example, in fact, let's do it real quick. We're gonna say alter table inventory column. All right, there we go. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that every store has one of each movie. And what we want to do is if someone rents a movie, we want to change this quantity to one less, which happens to be 0 in this case. So as part of our transaction, what we're going to do is we're going to create the rental. And then once we create the rental, we want to subtract from inventory. Now you can imagine what would happen if we subtracted from quantity, but the rental didn't get made, right? We would have an issue where we have a movie that's forever not available to rent, but no one actually has it, if that makes sense, because the movie's still sitting on our shelf. We just don't have a rental to go with it. So it's like we're expecting someone to bring it back, even though it's still sitting there. So let's wrap this in a transaction so that it's all kosher. So we're going to start our rental. We're going to say insert into rental. We're going to say our rental date is cur date. Our inventory, and let me make sure that's actually not a timestamp. I think I already had a select statement. Okay, so it is a timestamp. Current timestamp. And then we need an inventory ID, which we are going to do 367. I'm just going to hard code that for right now. We're going to say 130, actually 459. Staff ID is 1, and last update date is current timestamp. All right. So that should get our rental. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say update inventory, set, we want to set the quantity to quantity -1, where film ID is equal to, and this is where we'd have to look at this one because it was 367. So film ID is 80, Blanket Beverly. and store ID is equal to 1. All right, so you can see now we have our rental that gets inserted and our inventory. And then we're going to say commit at this point. Hopefully, we're going to make sure it works. So let's start. There's our save point. Up, and I had my error. Now let's say that I update this. So now we can kind of see where the problem is, right? So we had an issue with our inventory, but we still updated the other one, because like if we're programming this, it's not like we're watching it. It kind of just goes. So now if we select everything from inventory, you'll notice the quantity is 0, but we didn't actually create the rental. So let's say roll back transaction, or just roll back, because this is what's nice. If there's ever an error, we want to stop and undo whatever we did. So if I say roll back, and then we go back here to our inventory, you'll notice we're back to 1, where we should be. So that's kind of like a good example. Now in this case, it looks like I did something weird here. Let's see, you have an error, unknown column rental in field list. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I forgot customer ID. Did I? No. Rental date, inventory ID 367, customer ID 459. Rental date. That's what we needed. And what was that? Is that one actually a date? Rental date is a timestamp. Okay, so where did I? Oh, I just put it in there twice. There we go. Let's fix that. Okay, let's try this again now. So we want to do our save point, our insert. And it looks like we messed up again. So let's roll back. Okay, what did I do here? Oh, sorry, I must be going too fast for my brain here. So rental date, inventory ID. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's try third time's the charm. So we begin our transaction because we want to have a place to go back to if something fails. We do our insert. We update our quantity to show that it was removed. And then we could commit. In this case, I'm going to roll back because I don't want to have to try to undo it all. So I'm going to roll back there. But normally when everything works, we would commit. Does that make sense to everybody? Hopefully.
Yeah, that makes sense. At first I wasn't following you, but then I see you're just doing a simple insert statement. And then once you've inserted, you're updating what you just inserted.
Yep, because basically when we rent this movie out, when we create a rental for that movie, we want to decrease the quantity in the store. So I basically added a column to the inventory to kind of show like, hey, we have one movie. And technically, I think that there actually is kind of already that way. Anyways, but just to mimic it, like if we had a quantity in inventory, we could then decrease that by 1 to say like, hey, you know, we're out of movies, but we only want to do that if everything works, right? So like that's like part of the whole transaction, the whole process, because we don't want to get stuck halfway in the middle, because then we have bad data. So part of keeping our processes clean is using these transactions, which, you know, basically whatever is part of a workflow somewhere we don't want to get stuck halfway in the middle of, we use these save points. And a lot of times they're used just as a safeguard. It's like a little mini backup, right? So if I say like, oh, I want to, you know, because I could do something this might in a production database, because this is the problem. A lot of times you have to do this in production. So I'm going to create a save point called start point, and I'm going to say update customer set last name equal to null. Let's say I forget my my where clause. Oh, can't be null. Let's set it to null quotes. So I just updated 600 people. Now, obviously, that's probably not what I was expecting. And so I just broke everything. So a lot of times in like when you're working with your database, you kind of want to roll those up into something anyways, because that way, when you do things and you mess up, you can always go back. Because if you accidentally delete everyone's last name, it's not like you can just magically say, hey, control Z. Databases don't have control Z. This is our control Z. This is our edit undo. We just have to manually define it. So if you want to create a point that you can go back to, giving that something goes wrong, you can use a save point and a rollback. Now, the other important thing is when you finish doing what you need to, you can commit, and then it will make everything permanent.
Okay, so can I just ask a quick question? Because I apologize, I have not had a chance to read the material yet for this week.
Sure.
Every time you do the save point, you need to give it a name.
You don't have to, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, I'm just going to drop this column here real quick. I don't think you have to give it a name. So let's just try it. We're going to say save point. And then we're going to say update customer set last name equal to Fowler, where last name is equal to Smith. So let's do a save point. Oh, nope, it looks like here you do need a name.
Okay, that's good. Good to know.
Yeah. So, and just so you know, the reason this process changes from database to database. So,
okay,
for example, that's why I don't know that off the top of my head, because I use SQL Server all day, and in SQL Server, you can do you don't have to give it a name. You just say begin transaction. But the concepts are always the same. That's what's really nice about SQL is even though the syntax might change, the concepts are always the same. So in SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, the process looks almost the exact same. The only difference is like we don't have to give it a name. So like I can say begin transaction, do whatever I need to, and then commit or roll back. And there might be a way, maybe I'm just doing it wrong. But yeah, I know that MySQL and Oracle use save point instead of a begin transaction. So I think it might have to have a name.
that's fine.
But yeah, good question.
I just hadn't seen save point before until this week, so it's just new to me.
Yeah, and they're a nice utility. They're good to know because if you're ever working with, like, for example, when you guys start working on your systems, when you write your workflows for like, what happens when they click make reservation, right? Because like, let's say this is an extreme example, but let's say you're writing a database, or for example, like let's say we're writing a database where we're selling soap. And let's say you have a database that keeps track of your inventory, like how much of each item do I have? If you sell something, maybe you don't want to, or when someone says, make order, we not only want to say, insert into order, but we also want to update our inventory and subtract a quantity, just like what we did in this example. And so you'll want to include those save points in there because even through all that, like let's say you're testing, if you're testing your query, what I would do is like, you just want to say, hey, I'm writing this insert statement. I just want to make sure it works. Rather than have to like delete it after the fact and try to pinpoint the right one, you can just say save point, try, and then, do your insert statement. So like, let's just let's say I'm just testing this, oh, I'm just testing my code. I'm going to create a save point. Let's insert into rental. It worked. Okay, so rather than try to delete that record, I'm just going to then roll back. And then it's like it never happened.
That is
So
a really nice feature.
yeah, because if you're, like if you're like constantly testing things, because even yeah, you can really quickly just undo everything, right? Which is really nice. So yeah. The one thing, just like what I got caught in, the one thing you want to do is make sure if you're using an IDE like dbeaver or Workbench, some of them do have auto commit functionality where basically everything you do is isolated to its own commit, which you want to make sure that's turned off, because obviously if you do something, even if you create your transaction, save point try, the minute you run this, it commits it automatically. That's what's called an auto commit. So we don't want that. You want to do a manual commit.
Okay, and I do remember reading something about that either this term or last term when I took 111. And yeah, I think we might have turned that on to auto commit. So
Yeah, because if you're not used to this process, because now like where I'm on manual commit, let's say I go do all this work, change my database, do X, Y, and Z. If I forget to run commit, and let's say I never ran commit, like let's say I spent 3 hours building all this stuff and I forget to do commit and I just close this window and done. Those changes will never be made permanent, if that makes sense.
okay.
And so that's why a lot of people, especially in the beginning, turn them on. Because like if you're just doing like normal stuff, you might not need this, and in fact you probably want it to be normal. Like me, up through all this class, I've had mine on the manual commit, or on auto commit, and it hasn't been a problem up until we wanted to start using our own commit, our own transactions. And then that's when it becomes an issue.
Okay. So in order to use the rollback function and the save point function, we need to turn off auto commit.
Yeah, because otherwise each one will be its own commit anyways.
Okay.
So you'll want to do that. Now, if you're working through command line, it should be good. I don't think Workbench has it. I think Workbench has it on by default as well. So you'll want to make sure you turn that off as well if you want to use them. But the nice thing is they're pretty simple. But the other thing I just wanted to verify, I know there's only two of you here, but I just wanted to verify, does everyone know, obviously, what an insert and an update statement do?
So the insert puts in new information and the update changes existing information.
Correct. Yep. So an insert will insert a new record or a new row into your table, where an update will change an existing rows. So yeah. And then the delete statement will just obviously delete records from a table. Just so you know, one of the most popular database interview questions, they'll ask you what's the difference between truncate and delete. And to be honest, I rarely use truncate, and you're about to find why. So these save points are nice, right? So like if I said, let's just do another example here. Let's say I do save point pre-delete, right? And now I'm going to say delete from customer. Now, if I run this, and let's delete from something else. Let's delete from rental. So I just deleted 16,000 rows of data. So I can say select everything from rental, and it is empty, which is obviously a problem. You do this in a fancy data set, in your production data set, you're going to be in big trouble, right? Hopefully you have a backup somewhere, but because we had our save point, I could just say, roll back. And now I can select everything from rental and they're all back. If I were to say truncate, rental. If I were to do a truncate instead, now I'm not even going to do it because a truncate basically deletes everything out of the table. But the difference is you can't undo it. No matter, even if it's in the save point, I can't undo a truncate. So in your interview question, if you get asked what's the difference between a truncate and a delete, you can roll back a delete. You cannot roll back a truncate. So you only want to use truncate in very specific, rare, isolated circumstances. Because if you ever truncate and need to undo it, you're in big trouble. Well, yeah, you can't. So anyways, that's a delete, truncate, insert updates. Cool. That's pretty much all I had. Do you two have any questions?
I don't. This has been very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and and I was excited. This week is things should be getting easier because as I always tell people this, the learning curve on databases is really steep at first, but then you kind of get to a point where like the circles start filling up because you got to start somewhere, right? And a lot of times it's hard because you don't have that background knowledge to like maybe understand some things, but we should be getting to the point where we're learning less, and also foundational knowledge should be getting better. So workload should be getting easier as far as new curriculum. And so just as a reminder, if you're working on a final project, we are actually getting down to the end. We're on week 11. If I would highly recommend that if you want, you can submit your final project early for me to review. So, just keep in mind that based on that, you've got like 2-3 weeks left to have it actually final submitted. So if you want to get it in a little early to check, just to make sure everything's there and it's looking good, you might want to make sure you're on track with that. So that's just a reminder. So anyways, if there's no other questions,
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah, sure.
If we are doing our own database for the final, what I thought there was somewhere that said what we needed to do, but then I couldn't find it the other day when I went looking for it.
Yeah, it should be under the let me pull it up here real quick. It should be under in the last week module. Here it is. It's actually in week 13, which might be why it's kind of hard to find. Okay. So week 13 final course project option. So yeah, due March 27th. So that's actually pretty soon here, March 27th. So I'm gonna adjust that due date just a little bit.
Thank you, because I wasn't planning on having it ready.
I think they put it a little early just so because grading those will be longer. Okay. I'm gonna change that to April 7th. I'll change that final project to April 7th.
Okay, and it's in week 13.
Yes, correct. Yep, right there, week 13 final course project option, and it does have everything you need. And there was one week where we went over that. If anyone needs to have a reminder of going through what all the deliverables are. Right. And real quick, I'll just go over again. ERD diagram, we should all know. Basically our 12 tables, and then test cases for all of our operations against the 12 tables. So basically, you need to have an insert statement. You need to have a select statement. You need to have an update statement and a delete statement for all of your operations. So for example, what I would do is I would just take your user interface and say, oh, when I say create reservation, like when my user says, I want to I want to reserve this room to, rent a hotel room. What happens? Well, obviously we create a rental record. We might update the availability. Or if they say, oh, cancel reservation, we're going to delete, or we're going to update. Or if I say view reservations, what select statement's going to run? So you need to have at least one of each of those: create, read, update, delete. Um, Obviously there needs to be some bulk there. You can't just do it like for one little, like one for each, right? There needs to be a pretty fleshed out for the most part. And worst case scenario, when you're building out your database and testing, like let's say you have a table that's kind of there for a lookup, like, oh, credit card type, right? Let's say you just need Visa, MasterCard, Discover card. Just include those, include all your scripts where you create your tables, include all your scripts where you insert your test data, because that will all work for this. Now, I do want to see you map some of your UI there, but depending on what your UI looks like, maybe there's less, but that's why you include all that. I would just save everything. Everything you do, just save and organize it so you can submit it, because the more that's there, the better.
And what do you mean by mockups of user interface form?
So, if you've ever taken like Web 230, where you kind of like wireframe out what your website looks like.
I haven't.
Okay, well, you can kind of just like essentially just draw a wireframe of what your website looks like.
Okay.
And it can be simple. A wireframe is basically just draw the boxes. Let's see if we can find a wireframe example. So here's like a wireframe example, right? Now this one's way detailed. It doesn't have to be this detailed. But like if I was doing like something like this with a shopping cart, like what happens when that may not be a good example. Okay, so like here's one. So like let's say what happens in the database when I say sign up now? Let's say that that's actually where you register, or like right here, request live demo. If I click this, it's going to insert a record into a database, right? So what I would do is I draw your mockup, and then up to you how you do it, but you can like map buttons to workflows. So I would say, maybe you draw a line to it and give it a name, maybe a number, but really you just need to map a button to like say, oh, when I say request live demo, this is the SQL code that will essentially handle that process. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So like in your case, like if you're doing like a store, you might want to say like order. A lot of those are bad examples. Like, like what happens when they click the order button? Well, we're going to select everything from their cart. And then, because when they add something to their cart, we want to keep that in a database table. So when they add something to their cart, we want to then do an insert statement. And when they check out, we want to insert into order. Now you can go as detailed or as simple as you want, depending on like your scenario, depending on like what tables you have and that sort of thing. But yeah, really it's just about like saying like really what matters is at the end of the day, to like kind of, because like this whole thing is like if you're proposing a new product to like a project lead, to say like, hey, like I've got this idea for the system. Maybe it's a web store. Maybe it's someone asked the other day, like, what was a good idea? And I said, well, like you could do chores, like build a database that will, or a database website. Now we don't actually have to build the website. That's why you're just doing the mock-up. But if you were going to design an app that would manage who does what chores for the month, what would that look like? Now, in that case, you would want to like draw what does the app look like crudely. And like when they click like assign a chore button, like what does that do on the back end, or, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Okay. And then that's where your test case SQL script files come in. Cause basically you could have a script file, a SQL file that says like, um, place order. It could be a script file, and that could be, insert into order, and update quantity, something like that. Basically have like a use case, like a test case, meaning like, oh, if someone buys something, this is the SQL I'm going to need. to build into my system. Now, where it's a test case, just like what I did, right? Where I kind of just like randomly picked a movie, you can do the same thing. So you'll want to have some sample data in there, and it could just be once. Like if you're selling soap, you could just have one product in your database to kind of use for your test case, and like one fake customer. And then you can build all your test cases against that.
Okay.
And then the biggest one is a PowerPoint, where basically like you're selling what work you did. Because really all this stuff is going to be in the appendix, if that makes sense. It's going to be supporting documents. So really what I'd like to see is like a PowerPoint and then like a zip file. Basically a PowerPoint and a folder. So a folder that has all your supporting documentation, which is what's highlighted. And then the last little bit is going to the one that's by itself is the PowerPoint. Because the way that I'm going to look at this is I'm going to look at it just like I would in the business, right? I'm going to look at your PowerPoint and get the gist of it. Basically say, what's the purpose of a model? What's the rationale? Like, why do you want to build this? How did you go about designing the user interface? And don't focus so much on like making it fancy, but just like, how does this going to work really? And then like, what work have you done to map out like how this actually works? Meaning your CRUD operations, what happens when you click the buttons? Like, how much work have you done? And so that's what the PowerPoint's going to do. And then really from there, I'm going to go into your supporting documents and just kind of poke around where I have questions. Or I'm going to open up your ERD, kind of like see like, okay, this is how the data is laid out. I'm going to open up some of your test cases and say, yeah, this will work. That kind of thing. So really it's just like present it to me like you're trying to convince me to build it. Like, let's say I'm an investor, you have this good idea and you just need some initial capital to get it going, and you're trying to convince me of that. Because part of that is I'm going to make sure that you're able, technically able, and come to me with enough evidence that you can do the work, which this is actually a really good real life example of what you would probably go to someone if you were looking to do something like that. Okay. Yeah. So any other questions?
None for me.
All righty. Well, I will let you guys get to your evening. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. If you have any questions, just feel free to send me a note.
Thank you, Brother Crick.
Yep, no problem.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.